Hello, everybody. It's Pappy, and we're going to go over some Arc 3.0 speculation today. I wanted to go over player verbs or buffs, and then the enemy verbs and debuffs, because we know that with Void 3.0 and Solar 3.0, and with Stasis, the original 3.0 kind of format, we know that Bungie wants to give us verbs, positive verbs that affect the player in a positive way, and then debuffs that we can apply to the enemies to give them like a negative debuff that will allow us to do more damage or just cause some kind of effect on them. Now we know that with Void you have Devour, Invisibility, Overshield, and then and Solar you have Radiant, and the others, So I was thinking for Arc, the thing that makes the most sense to me would be something called Charge. And this would be the first buff we're going to go over. The first verb is Charge. You can gain a charge stack by sprinting or sliding, and you can have up to 10 charges or up to 100% or however they want to do it. You gain them relatively quickly, probably around every 2 seconds of sprinting and sliding. You would gain a single charge. Now, while that might seem fast, you can also lose them pretty quickly as well by walking, crouching, or just standing still. And you would probably lose a charge for every 1 second of standing still, or just walking and crouching, whatever it is you're doing. Now, these charges, you can have up to 10 or up to 100% or whatever they do. Now, you can spend all your charges by using any of your supers or your abilities, and based on how many stacks of charge you have, you can get various benefits to those things, whether it's you're going to deal more arc damage in general with your ability, or maybe your overshield, or maybe not overshield, but if your Titan Barricade, if you have up to, if you have like 5 charges of this charge stack thing, then maybe your shield will have more hit points. Or whenever you have 10 charges or something and you deploy your shield, it does a little arc shockwave around you or something. I don't really know, but I would think this would be cool if you could have you could run around for a while, build up these charges, and then you could use your super, like if you use Thunder Crash Titan, or maybe the Warlock that uses the Arc Beam Kamehameha, you could deal like a lot more damage with that, or maybe it would last longer because of your charges, or you would just deal more of that arcing damage where the lightning effect will bounce from one enemy to another. Another thing you could do is for like hunters, maybe their little staff twirl defensive ability on their super would allow for, it's Whirlwind Guard is what it's called. Maybe it would last longer, or it could reflect more damage back, or maybe it could deal damage to enemies, whatever it is. Now, the big benefit of Charge is when you hit 10 charges, we'll activate the other player verb or buff, which will be called something along the lines of Max Power. So after acquiring max charges, you get your 100%, you get your times 10 charges, you will become max powered. Now, whatever they want to call it, I really don't know, but max powered and charge is just the thing that I'm going for. Think of like a battery. So having a max power buff will give you various movement buffs, such as increased movement speed, longer slide, or even higher jumps. You could have like a faster slide, you could have a faster jump, maybe I really don't know what else you could do involving your movement too well, but what it could do is, like, the reason I think we're going to have that movement buff, just various movement buffs in general, is because Kevin Yanis said, and I couldn't find a tweet, I think it was deleted, but basically what he was saying was the artifact from the Synaptic Spear artifact that we used in the activity where we were inside Savathun's mind, and we were able to jump really far and slide really far and do all this different stuff with the Synaptic Spear. Kevin Yanis mentioned that they used the Synaptic Spear to try to think of ways to make Arc 3.0. It was kind of a little object that they could use to test some ideas for Arc 3.0. And he specifically mentioned a lot of stuff involving movement speed, longer slides, higher jumps, all that kind of stuff. And so I think what we could do is you run around and you do what you got to do. You gain your 10 charges, you become max powered. Now you have this max power buff on your character. Now I was thinking maybe 10 seconds, but I really don't know. But the max power buff lasts about 10 seconds. You have increased movement speed, longer slide, faster slide, higher jumps, faster jumps, all that stuff. And you also deal increased ability and super damage while you're in that max power. And you will also deal, like if you melee someone or if you throw a grenade at someone or you use your super on them, you're going to deal that arcing damage to nearby mobs and enemy players if you're in PvP. I could not think of a third verb or buff, but you could do something along the lines of maybe your charge can go beyond 10. So think, for instance, and this could kind of be like a negative side effect as a penalty for running around too much. So your charge, you could have up to 10, and once you hit 10, you get max power, and you can run around and do stuff with max power. But say, for instance, there's perks, abilities, aspects, fragments, and stuff that give you extra charges, and you would have to manage your charge in order to not have too much charge, or go beyond max power too far, or maybe you would become overcharged, which is also a debuff that we're going to talk about later for the enemies, but it would essentially do the same thing it's going to do for the enemies. An arc explosion will happen at your location, dealing damage to yourself and even nearby enemies. It wouldn't hurt your teammates at all. And it'll deal that arcing damage around. So there's a little bit of a bonus to it. If you had high resilience and high recovery, you could overcharge yourself beyond max power and then just kind of erupt wherever you were, kind of like how landfall works with warlocks. And you would deal a lot of damage to the people around you and the enemies around you, but you would also get hurt a lot yourself. And if anything survived, they could easily wipe you out. It would probably leave you like 1 health or something. But I really don't know for the other player verb of what would affect the player. I couldn't really think of anything else other than maybe something like becoming, too charged, overpowered, over max power, But onto the enemy verbs and debuffs. You got flashed, concussed, stunned, that would all be in the same thing. I don't know what they would call it, but that would be the same kind of idea. Using melees, grenades, supers, arc weapons, exotic perks, etc., you'll be able to stun, flash, and or concuss an enemy. And this will work the same as it does really right now. But now it'll have its own verbiage that Bungie can, herald back to for other future stuff that they can think of. Not the most exciting thing, but it's something that already exists. So, I feel like it would become one of the verbs, one of the debuff verbs. Making enemies aim worse, making them move slower, and, just whatever else Bungie can think of. Now, arcing is where it gets a little bit more interesting. Arcing will be similar to the charge buff for our Guardian, but the enemy will receive an arcing debuff that will stack up to 10 times, similar to the charge buff. this debuff will gain stacks for being hit with our abilities, supers, arc weapons, exotics, etc., etc., etc. If the enemy dies while in an arcing state, they will send out arcing damage to nearby enemies based on how many stacks of arcing they had when they died. So what you could do is you constantly throw your grenades, hit them with melees, hit them with those exotic weapons and perks and exotic perks on your armors, and even arc weapons that could have perks similar to incandescent. You could just have a perk on the weapon called arcing or something. Weapons like Trinity's Ghoul, and Risk Runner could apply this arcing debuff to enemies as well, as being part of the guns themselves. And when they die, based on how much arcing stacks they had, they would send out arcing damage to all the enemies around them, based on how many arcing stacks that they had whenever they died. So if they had 7 and there were 7 other enemies around them, maybe it would send out arcing damage to 7 extra enemies, or maybe it would deal let's say they had that times 7 arcing debuff. If there's only like 1 enemy around them, it would deal all 7 of those arcing debuff stacks to that one target. So if the enemy you're fighting against has 7 arcing debuffs, then you kill it. If the arcing debuff would then arc over to this new enemy, and it would deal more damage to that one enemy than it would if there were 7 enemies around them, if that makes any sense. Now the other verb I thought of was overcharged, and this is like the one I was talking about that the player could have, but I really don't know if I like that idea. But it makes more sense for the enemy to get this one. If the enemy gets all 10 stacks of the arcing debuff and is still alive, then an arc explosion will occur at their location, dealing arcing damage to that enemy, hopefully killing them. If it doesn't, whatever, and all nearby enemies as well. And so what you would do is, if Risk Runner adds like maybe 1 stack of arcing to an enemy every like 5 to 10 hits or something, you could go through a couple of clips of Risk Runners and apply all 10 stacks, and then while Risk Runner's chaining the arc damage to the enemies over and over and over again, you would also be filling with that arcing debuff. And then once they hit that 10, then there's a huge explosion and deals arcing damage to that enemy and all nearby enemies. And I feel like the synergy with running around, becoming charged, hitting that max power, running around even faster, dealing that extra damage, applying those arcing debuffs, causing enemies to become overcharged, they explode, arcing damage hits them and other things around them. Maybe there's an aspect or a fragment or an exotic perk or something that could also cause the flash and concuss to other enemies. That's all I really have for the verbs, but you could definitely also use this for so you've got your perks, you've got your abilities, you got your exotics, you got your weapons and arc weapons, and just all this kind of stuff to apply all these different effects to the enemies and to yourself. You also have your exotic armors. So, say for instance, Titans have Dune Marchers. Dune Marchers generate I forget what it's called, but it generates like a static charge on your Titan, and then once you melee someone, whether it's at a distance or it's up close or whatever, you send out arcing damage to all the nearby enemies. It doesn't deal that much damage, but sometimes it's that little extra push that you might need. Now, since you have a charge and a max power and that kind of stuff, and you're also going to be doing that arcing damage anyway, due to all the buffs and debuffs to the player and to the enemy, maybe change its perks around, because we know that they change these exotics and their perks and how they work at least a little bit to match the new verbs or how the new subclasses and elements work as a whole. So what they could do to the Dune Marchers is maybe you gain twice as many charges over time as you would normally, but maybe you also lose your charges twice as fast, or something along those lines. So you could use Dune Marchers to build up your charges really fast and hit that max power and have that buff on your character. Now this might be a little busted, I don't really know, but yeah, they would definitely change around the exotics for each of the classes to just allow for more flexibility and more just crazy builds that you could come up with. Definitely what I would like to do as a Titan main would be to go in and use Dune Marchers to build up my charges, hit max power with that increased movement speed and slide and jumps. I would take advantage of that and use Code of the Missiles melee, where you can launch yourself from really high in the air down toward wherever you want to hit, crash down and deal damage. Well, I would run around, build up my max power. When I hit that max power buff, I would jump way higher than normal at a higher speed, and then I would use my melee while in max power and come down and deal that arcing damage to all the enemies and other players and whoever else I'm coming after. And with the max power buff and with the arcing debuff on the enemies, and then whatever else I've done to my character or to my stats or whatever, maybe you could end up with some one-shot PvP stuff. Maybe you could deal tons of damage in PvE, or at the very least you could deal a lot of damage to a lot of different things all at once, similar to how it works now whenever you use some of these perks together, but definitely cranked up to 11. Well, I think that's about all I really have for my Arc 3.0 speculation. The thing that I think that we're going to get for sure is some form of static charge functionality to buff our character. How they do the rest of it, I don't know, but I mean, it seems like a no-brainer to include some form of static or charging or battery, kind of mechanism within our character as a buff. But yeah, I'm Pappy, and I will see y'all in the next video. Peace.